Can we sleep in your barn?" the trembling girl asked, clutching her younger brother's hand as the mountain rancher's weathered face emerged from his doorway. The townsfolk had already branded her, another drifter destined for the unmarked graves beyond the mining camps, too proud to beg, yet too desperate to survive the coming winter. They whispered she'd be gone by first snow, forgotten like all the others who dared pass through their unforgiving settlement. But the giant cowboy saw something different in her steady gaze, something that stirred memories of his own buried shame and the friend he'd failed years before. Her protective grip on that worn leather satchel suggested she carried more than just belongings, perhaps the very secrets that could unravel everything this isolated community had built on lies. Would his conscience finally overpower his cowardice, or would history repeat its cruelest lesson? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The sun hung low over Millbrook, Colorado, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Sella Washington pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as another door slammed in her face. The third rejection of the day. Her 10-year-old brother Samuel pressed closer to her side. His stomach had been growling for hours, but he hadn't complained once. Good boy. Always the good boy. "Next place," she whispered, though her voice carried less conviction than before. The townspeople watched from their windows and porches. Some shook their heads. Others simply stared with cold indifference. A woman in a blue bonnet whispered something to her neighbor, who nodded knowingly. They'd seen this story before. Drifters came and went. Most didn't last the first hard frost. Sella adjusted the worn leather satchel on her shoulder. The weight of it reminded her why they'd traveled so far. Why they couldn't give up now. Inside those cracked folds lay everything that mattered. The general store owner had been particularly cruel. He'd looked right through her when she'd asked about work, as if she were invisible, as if Samuel didn't exist either. "We ain't hiring," he'd said without even glancing up from his ledger. She'd tried explaining they weren't looking for charity, just a chance to earn their keep. But his expression had hardened the moment she'd opened her mouth. Her words came out too clear, too educated. That always made them suspicious. Deputy Sheriff Kane had been different, though, almost helpful. He'd approached them outside the store with what seemed like genuine concern. "You folks look like you could use some assistance." Something about his smile hadn't reached his eyes, but he'd been the first person to speak to them without outright hostility. "We're looking for work, a place to stay," Sella had replied carefully. Kane had studied them both for a long moment. His questions had come quickly then. Where were they from? What brought them to Millbrook? Did they have family here? She'd given him partial answers, enough to seem cooperative, not enough to reveal their true purpose. Now, as evening approached, options were running thin. The temperature would drop soon. Samuel's thin jacket wouldn't be enough. The road leading out of town stretched toward the mountains. A few scattered ranches dotted the landscape. Most looked abandoned or unwelcoming. But there, about a mile from the main settlement, smoke rose from a chimney. "One more try," she told Samuel. They walked the dusty path as shadows lengthened around them. The ranch appeared modest but well-maintained. Cattle grazed in nearby pastures. A large barn stood beside the main house. The front door opened before they reached the porch steps. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged. His beard was streaked with gray, and deep lines creased his weathered face. This had to be Magnus Thornfield. She'd heard his name mentioned in town, always with a certain wariness. He lived alone, kept to himself. Some said he'd been different once, before something had changed him. "We're not looking for trouble," Sella said quickly. "Just wondering if we could sleep in your barn tonight. We can pay." She reached into her pocket, producing the few coins they had left. Mac Thornfield's eyes moved from her face to Samuel's, then back again. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition? No, something deeper. Regret, maybe. Barn's not fit for sleeping. Her heart sank. Another rejection. But then he stepped back from the doorway. "You can use the small room behind the kitchen." just for tonight. Samuel's face lit up, but Sella remained cautious. Kindness often came with hidden costs. "We're grateful for any shelter," she replied. Mac led them inside without another word. The house was sparse but clean. A fire crackled in the main room's stone fireplace. The smell of cooked meat lingered in the air. He showed them to a small chamber that might once have housed a servant. 2 narrow beds, a wash basin. It felt like luxury after nights spent under open sky. "There's bread and cold beef in the kitchen," Mac said. "Help yourselves." As he turned to leave, Chella spoke up. "We're looking for someone, a man named Thomas Washington. He would have passed through here maybe 3 years back." Mac froze in the doorway, his shoulders tensed. "Don't know that name?" But his tone had changed, become guarded. "He was a surveyor," Sella pressed. "Good with numbers, good with maps." "I said I don't know him." Mac left them alone then, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Samuel had already discovered the food. He tore into a piece of bread like he hadn't eaten in days, which wasn't far from the truth. Sella watched him eat while her mind worked. Mac Thornfield knew something about their father. His reaction had been too quick, too defensive. She opened her satchel carefully, checking that everything remained inside. The surveyor's tools wrapped in oiled cloth, the legal documents in their leather portfolio, the hand-drawn map with careful notations in her father's precise handwriting. 3 years of searching had led them here. 3 years of following cold trails and dead ends. But something about Millbrook felt different. The way Deputy Kane had questioned them, the way Mac had reacted to their father's name. They were close to something. She could feel it. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Winter was coming whether they were ready or not. But tomorrow would bring answers. It had to. The smell of smoke woke Sella before dawn. Not the comforting scent of a hearth fire, something sharper, more urgent. She bolted upright in the narrow bed. Orange light flickered through the small window. Samuel stirred beside her, coughing. "Fire," she whispered, shaking him awake. They grabbed their few belongings and rushed outside. The barn blazed against the dark sky. Flames licked at the wooden beams while sparks danced in the cold air. Mac stood in his nightclothes, a bucket hanging useless in his hand. The fire had spread too far, too fast. "Anyone hurt?" he called out. "We're safe," Sella replied. But something felt wrong. The flames had started in multiple places. She could see the pattern even from a distance. This wasn't an accident. By sunrise, only charred timbers remained. Mac surveyed the damage with grim silence. His shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. "You can stay in the house," he said finally, "until you find somewhere else." Chella studied his weathered face. Yesterday he'd been reluctant to offer even temporary shelter. Now he was inviting them into his home proper. "People won't like that," she said quietly. "People can mind their own business." But they both knew it wouldn't be that simple. A white rancher housing a black woman and child would draw attention. The wrong kind of attention. Deputy Kane arrived within the hour. He examined the barn's remains with professional interest, taking notes in a small leather book. "Terrible shame," he said to Mac. "These old structures burn so easily." His eyes lingered on Sella and Samuel. There was something calculating in his expression. "You folks certainly have had some bad luck since arriving." "Bad luck follows some people," Mac replied tersely. Kane nodded slowly as if filing away this information. "Well, I'm sure you'll sort things out. Just remember, sometimes the safest choice is to keep moving." After Kane left, Mac led them to the ruins. Sella picked through the debris while Samuel watched from a safe distance. Most everything had been destroyed, but she found what she was looking for. Hidden beneath a collapsed beam lay a wooden crate. The fire had barely touched it. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas, were surveyor's tools. A compass, a measuring chain, a folding ruler marked with precise measurements. Mac's face went pale when he saw them. "Those belong to Thomas Washington," she said. It wasn't a question. Mac's silence stretched too long. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the compass. He left them here 3 years ago, he admitted finally. Said he'd be back for them. But he never came back. No, he never did. Shella lifted the compass carefully. Her father had taught her to use it when she was barely older than Samuel. She remembered his patient voice explaining magnetic declination and true north. Knowledge is the one thing they can't take from you, he'd always said. Learn everything you can. So she had. Mathematics and reading when other girls learned only sewing. Land measurement and legal procedures when others focused on domestic skills. Her father had prepared her for something, though she'd never understood what until now. Show me where he was working, she said to Mac. They walked to the ridge overlooking the valley. The land stretched for miles in every direction, rich grassland dotted with outcroppings of stone. Mac pointed to a section northeast of his property. He was surveying that area. Said someone had hired him to map mineral rights. Chella pulled out her father's hand-drawn chart from the leather satchel. She compared it to the landscape before them. The measurements matched perfectly. He found something, didn't he? Mac nodded reluctantly. Silver, maybe more. The vein ran deeper than anyone expected. Who hired him? Never said. But he was excited about something those last few days. Kept talking about proper paperwork and legal claims. Chella studied the map more closely. Her father's notes were written in their family's private code, a system he'd developed to protect sensitive information. Numbers and symbols that looked random to outsiders, but told a complete story to those who knew how to read them. The land contained significant mineral deposits, but more importantly, her father had filed legal claims with the territorial government. Claims that would still be valid if properly documented. Claims that someone might kill to suppress. Mac, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. We didn't come here looking for charity or work. She opened the leather portfolio from her satchel. Inside were official documents bearing territorial seals, surveyor's certificates, mineral rights filings, all bearing the name Thomas Washington and his legal heirs. This land belongs to me now. Mac stared at the papers. His face cycled through confusion, understanding, then fear. You can't be serious. A woman can't own mining claims. A woman can if she inherits them legally from her father. The implications settled over them both like a heavy blanket. Deputy Kane's interest suddenly made sense. The convenient barn fire. The suggestions they should keep moving. Someone had been working her father's claim illegally. Someone with enough power to make a surveyor disappear permanently. They killed him, she said quietly. Mac's weathered hands clenched into fists. If that's true, then you're in more danger than you know. Samuel called out from the house, breaking the tense moment. But the weight of revelation hung between them. Sella owned valuable land that others had claimed through murder and theft. She possessed legal documents that could destroy powerful people. And now those same people knew exactly where to find her. That evening, Chella spread her father's surveying tools across Mac's kitchen table. The compass gleamed in the lamplight like a promise. Samuel watched with wide eyes as she demonstrated how the instruments worked. Papa taught me to read the land, she explained, adjusting the compass bearing. Every hill has a story. Every rock formation tells you what lies beneath. Mac leaned against the doorframe, studying her movements. Her hands moved with practiced confidence across the tools. No hesitation, no uncertainty. How old were you when he started teaching you? 7, maybe 8. She remembered those early lessons clearly. Her father crouched beside her in empty fields, showing her how to sight a bearing, how to measure distances using the surveyor's chain, how to record everything in neat, precise notes. Other fathers teach their daughters to cook and sew, he'd said, but knowledge is the one thing they can never steal from you. Now she understood why those lessons had felt so urgent, so important. The next morning, she convinced Mac to take her to the disputed land. They rode his horses northeast, following game trails through the foothills. Samuel stayed behind, content to explore Mac's library of old books. The terrain matched her father's maps exactly. Rolling grassland gave way to rocky outcroppings. A small creek meandered through the valley bottom. everything precisely documented in Thomas Washington's careful handwriting. But someone else had been here recently. Fresh excavation marks scarred the hillside. Wooden support beams framed a mine entrance that hadn't existed 3 years ago. "They've been working it," Mac said grimly. Sella dismounted and examined the mining operation. Professional equipment, systematic extraction. This wasn't the work of casual prospectors. For how long? Hard to say, maybe 2 years. She pulled out her father's documentation and compared it to the current scene. The mine entrance sat directly over the richest silver vein he'd identified. Someone had used his survey work to guide their illegal operation. They stole his research, she realized, used it to rob his claim. Mac's face darkened. His hands gripped the horse's reins tighter. "There's something else you need to know." He led her to a newer section of excavation. Fresh dirt had been turned recently, but this wasn't mineral extraction. The hole was too shallow, too narrow. "What is it?" "Looks like a grave." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at the disturbed earth, understanding flooding through her. Her father hadn't disappeared. He'd been murdered and buried on his own land. "We need proof," she said, though her voice shook. "Sella, if we're right about this, then whoever killed your father won't hesitate to kill us too." She knelt beside the makeshift grave. Rich soil clung to her fingers. Somewhere beneath lay the answers she'd been seeking for 3 years. "Then we better be smart about it." They rode back to Mac's ranch in tense silence. But Sella's mind was already working. Her father had taught her more than surveying. He'd shown her how to think strategically, how to plan 3 moves ahead. That afternoon, while Mac tended his cattle, she sat at his kitchen table with paper and ink. She began writing carefully documented letters, one to the territorial government, another to the federal marshal's office in Denver, a third to the mining claims office. Each letter detailed the same facts: Thomas Washington's legal claim to the disputed land, his disappearance 3 years ago, the evidence of illegal mining operations, the suspicious grave. Samuel helped her fold and address the envelopes. His small hands were steadier than hers. "Are we going to find Papa?" he asked quietly. "We're going to find the truth." She sealed the letters with wax from Mac's candles. Tomorrow she would find a way to post them without drawing attention. But their plans changed when Deputy Kane arrived at sunset. This time he wasn't alone. 2 men accompanied him, both armed and unfriendly. They dismounted with the casual confidence of people accustomed to getting their way. "Evening, Mac," Kane called out. "Need to have a word with your guests." Mac stepped onto his porch, positioning himself between Kane and the house. "They're under my protection." "That's admirable, but this is official business." Kane's companions spread out, flanking the porch. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "What kind of business?" Mac asked. "The kind that involves trespassing on private property, mining claims that don't belong to certain folks." Kella appeared in the doorway, her leather satchel held protectively against her chest. "The claims belong to me," she said clearly. "I have the legal documentation." Kane's smile was cold and patient. "See, that's where we have a problem. Those papers might say one thing, but reality says another. And reality is that colored folks don't own mining claims in this territory. The law says otherwise. The law says whatever I say it says." Kane stepped closer to the porch. His hand rested casually on his gun belt. "Now, I'm going to give you one more chance to be reasonable. Sign these papers transferring the claim to its rightful owners, and you can leave town peacefully." He produced a legal document from his coat, official looking, probably even legitimate in some twisted way. "And if I refuse? Then we'll have to discuss what happened to your father when he refused." The threat hung in the evening air like smoke. Kane's companions shifted slightly, hands moving toward their weapons. Mac stepped forward, his own hand finding the rifle leaning against the doorframe. "I think you gentlemen should leave my property. This isn't your fight, Mac. It is now." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched taut between them. Finally, Kane nodded to his men. They mounted their horses with deliberate slowness. You have until tomorrow evening to reconsider, Kane called out. After that, things get complicated. They rode away, leaving dust and menace in their wake. Cella watched them disappear into the gathering darkness. Her father's killers had revealed themselves. Now the real fight would begin. That night, Cella sat by candlelight at Mac's kitchen table. She pulled out a second notebook from her satchel, one she hadn't shown anyone. Page after page filled with careful observations, names, dates, conversations. She'd been documenting everything since arriving in Millbrook. Kane's veiled threats, the convenient barn fire, the mining operations location, even the way townspeople reacted when she mentioned her father's name. 3 years of investigation had taught her that truth required evidence. Mac watched her write with growing amazement. You've been planning this the whole time. Papa taught me to always have documentation. Words disappear, paper endures. She showed him her systematic notes. Kane's exact words during each encounter, the names of his companions, descriptions of the illegal mining equipment, measurements of the excavated areas. This is enough to bring down Kane and whoever he's working with, Max said. Not yet. We need witnesses, people willing to testify. The next morning, Cella walked into town alone, despite Mac's protests. She carried a small basket and wore her most humble expression, just another woman running errands. Her first stop was the general store. The owner barely glanced up when she entered. We don't extend credit, he said automatically. I'm not asking for credit. I'm offering lessons. He looked up then, confused. Reading lessons. For your daughter. She'd noticed the girl behind the counter struggling with a simple inventory list. Bright eyes, but clearly unable to decipher the written words. We can't afford no schooling. No payment required, just conversation. Within an hour, she was teaching Mary Ellen Henderson her letters. The girl soaked up knowledge like drought-parched soil absorbing rain. Her father watched with grudging interest. Where'd you learn to read so proper? He asked. My father believed education was important. By afternoon, word had spread. The blacksmith's wife arrived with her 2 young sons. Then the seamstress brought her daughter. Soon, Cella had 6 students gathered around the store's back table, but she was teaching more than literacy. During breaks, she asked careful questions about the town's history, about who owned what land, about Deputy Kane's activities over the past few years. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Several longtime residents had sold their properties under mysterious circumstances, always to the same unnamed buyer, always after visits from Kane suggesting their safety might be in jeopardy. My husband's claim was bought fair and square, insisted Martha Pike, the blacksmith's wife. Though the price was lower than we hoped. Who bought it? Some mining company out of Denver. Deputy Kane handled the paperwork. Cella made mental notes while helping young Jimmy Pike sound out simple words. Every story followed the same pattern. Kane would identify valuable properties, then pressure owners to sell cheaply. Those who refused faced escalating problems, break-ins, mysterious accidents. Sometimes people just disappeared. Like that surveyor fellow, muttered store owner Henderson. Thomas something. Asked too many questions about mineral rights. Then one day he was just gone. What kind of questions? Legal stuff. Who filed claims when? Whether the paperwork was properly recorded. Kella's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. What happened to him? Kane said he moved on, went back east. But he left his horse at the livery. Man doesn't abandon a good horse unless something's wrong. That evening, she returned to Mac's ranch with valuable intelligence. The conspiracy was larger than they'd suspected. Kane wasn't working alone. He was part of an organized operation systematically stealing land throughout the region. We need to move fast, she told Mac, before they realize what I've learned. She spent the night writing additional letters, this time to newspaper editors in Denver and Colorado Springs, detailed accounts of Kane's crimes supported by witness testimony and documented evidence. But morning brought a crushing setback. Kane arrived at dawn with an official-looking warrant. 4 armed men accompanied him. Magnus Thornfield, You're under arrest for harboring fugitives and interfering with a federal investigation. Mac stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand. What fugitives? What investigation? These two are wanted for theft in Kansas. Stole money from their former employer. Kane produced documents that looked legitimate. Wanted posters with Samuel and Sella's descriptions, even their correct names. Sella's blood ran cold. The papers were forgeries, but skillfully done. Kane had connections reaching far beyond Millbrook. Those are lies, Mac said firmly. That's for a judge to decide. Step away from the criminals, Mac. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Mac glanced at Sella, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. They couldn't fight 4 armed men. Not with Samuel in the house. Kane's men bound Mac's hands with practiced efficiency. As they loaded him into their wagon, Kane turned to Sella with a satisfied smile. Now we can discuss terms without distractions. After they disappeared down the road, Sella gathered Samuel and her most important documents. They couldn't stay at the ranch. Kane would return within hours to finish what he'd started. But she wasn't running blind this time. Her teaching sessions had created a network of allies, people who owed her debts of gratitude, people who'd witnessed Kane's corruption firsthand. Martha Pike met them at the edge of town after dark. She led them to an abandoned cabin in the foothills where they could hide safely. "I sent your letters to Denver like you asked," Martha whispered. "My cousin works for the Postal Service. Says federal marshals have been asking questions about missing persons in mining territories. How long before they arrive? Maybe a week, maybe 2. Kella stared out at the valley below. Millbrook's lights twinkled like fallen stars. Somewhere down there, Mac sat in jail for trying to help them. Somewhere else, Kane was planning their permanent silence. A week might be too long. She needed to force the confrontation on her own terms, in her own time. Tomorrow, she would stop running and start fighting back. Dawn broke clear and cold over the hidden cabin. Sella had spent the night preparing her final gambit, every document organized, every piece of evidence cataloged, her father's surveying tools arranged with military precision. Samuel slept peacefully in the corner, trusting her to keep him safe. That trust gave her strength. Martha Pike arrived before sunrise with news from town. Federal marshals rode in last night, 2 of them. They're asking hard questions about missing persons and illegal mining operations. Sella's heart leaped. Her letters had reached the right people. Where's Kane? Holed up in his office with his men, looks nervous, real nervous. And Mac? Still locked up, but Kane's having trouble explaining why he arrested a respected rancher without proper warrants. Chella gathered her leather satchel and stood. The moment had come to face her father's killers. "Take Samuel to the church when the bells ring noon," she instructed Martha. "Keep him there until this is over. What are you planning?" "Justice." Sella walked into Millbrook as the sun climbed higher. She carried herself differently now. No more humble posture or downcast eyes. Her spine was straight, her chin raised. She walked like a woman who owned valuable land and knew exactly how to prove it. The federal marshals had set up temporary headquarters in the hotel. Marshal Hayes was older, gray-haired, with the steady demeanor of a man who'd seen every kind of corruption. His partner, Marshal Rodriguez, was younger, but equally serious. "Miss Washington," Hayes said when she introduced herself. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." She placed her satchel on their table and began extracting documents. The original survey work, her father's mineral claims, the legal inheritance papers, Kane's forged transfer documents for comparison. "This is everything," she said simply. Hayes examined each paper carefully. His expression grew darker with every page. "These mining claims are legitimate federal filings," he confirmed, "and these transfer documents are clear forgeries. Deputy Kane tried to force me to sign them. When I refused, he arrested Magnus Thornfield on false charges." Rodriguez looked up from the forged wanted posters Kane had produced. "We checked with Kansas authorities. No warrants exist for you or your brother. These are complete fabrications. Kane also threatened me when I mentioned my father's disappearance, said I might face the same fate if I didn't cooperate." Hayes and Rodriguez exchanged meaningful looks. Miss Washington, we're going to need you to repeat these statements publicly. Are you prepared for that? I've been preparing for 3 years. Word spread quickly through town. The federal marshals were calling for an emergency hearing at the courthouse. All interested parties required to attend. Kane couldn't refuse without appearing guilty. By noon, the courthouse was packed. Townspeople filled every seat and lined the walls. Many of Sella's former students sat with their parents, offering silent support. Kane entered with his armed companions, but his usual swagger was absent. The presence of federal authority had changed the game completely. This hearing will determine the legitimacy of mining claims on the disputed territory northeast of town, Marshal Hayes announced. Miss Celestine Washington claims legal ownership through inheritance from her father, Thomas Washington. Cella stood and presented her evidence methodically. Each document passed inspection, each claim backed by federal records. Her father's survey work was meticulous and legally binding. The mineral rights belong to the Washington family, she stated clearly. Any mining operations conducted without our permission constitute theft. Kane's lawyer tried to argue that the claims had been abandoned, that Thomas Washington had voluntarily relinquished his rights before leaving the territory. Then where is Mr. Washington? Marshal Rodriguez asked. Why hasn't he appeared to confirm this version of events? Kane shifted uncomfortably in his seat. People move on. Mining is dangerous work. Dangerous indeed, Cella replied. She pulled out her final piece of evidence, especially when survey work reveals illegal operations already in progress. She displayed her father's final map, the one showing not just mineral deposits, but existing excavation work. Someone had been mining the land before Thomas Washington arrived. His survey had threatened to expose their theft. My father discovered that Deputy Kane was operating an illegal mine on federal land. When confronted with evidence, Kane chose murder over prosecution. The courthouse erupted in murmurs. Kane's face went pale. That's a serious accusation, Marshal Hayes said. Do you have proof? I have a witness. The back doors opened. Mac Thornfield walked in, freed from jail by the marshals that morning. Behind him came Martha Pike, her husband the blacksmith, store owner Henderson, and a dozen other townspeople. Kane threatened Miss Washington directly in my presence, Mac testified. Said she'd face the same fate as her father if she didn't sign over her claims. One by one, the townspeople came forward. Each described suspicious land acquisitions, mysterious disappearances, Kane's involvement in pressuring property sales. The blacksmith revealed that Kane had purchased his old claim for a fraction of its value after threatening his family's safety. Henderson admitted that Kane controlled most of the legitimate mining operations around Millbrook through intimidation and forged documents. Martha Pike testified that she'd seen Kane's men at the illegal mine site multiple times over the past 2 years. The evidence mounted like an avalanche, years of corruption and theft exposed by people Kane had assumed would never dare speak against him. These are all lies, Kane protested desperately. Conspiracy by troublemakers trying to steal legitimate mining operations. Marshal Hayes consulted his notes calmly. Deputy Kane, you're under arrest for land fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and suspicion of murder. Your associates are similarly charged. Kane's men reached for their weapons, but the marshals were faster. Federal authority trumped local corruption every time. As the handcuffs clicked around Kane's wrists, he glared at Cella with pure hatred. This isn't over. Yes, she replied quietly. It is. 3 days after Kane's arrest, the federal marshals led a search party to the disputed mining site. Cella rode alongside them, her father's surveying tools secured in her satchel. Mac and several townspeople followed at a respectful distance. The illegal excavation looked different in daylight with official witnesses present. What had seemed like professional mining operations now revealed itself as crude theft, equipment stolen from legitimate claims, support structures built without safety considerations, a hasty, greedy operation designed for quick extraction. Marshal Hayes examined the shallow grave they'd discovered. His expression grew grimmer as they carefully excavated the site. Within hours, they uncovered skeletal remains along with personal effects. A surveyor's compass engraved with the initials TW, a leather notebook filled with mineral calculations. A wedding ring that Sela recognized immediately. "That belonged to my mother," she said quietly. "Papa never took it off." The marshals documented everything methodically. Thomas Washington's death was officially classified as murder. Kane's conspiracy had claimed at least one life, possibly more. But for Sela, finding her father's remains brought unexpected peace. The 3-year search was finally over. She could lay him to rest properly. The funeral took place the following Sunday in Millbrook's small church. Half the town attended, including many who had initially rejected the Washington siblings. Shame had a way of changing perspectives. Reverend Morrison spoke about justice and redemption, about how truth eventually surfaces despite those who try to bury it. Max stood beside Sela and Samuel throughout the service, a silent pillar of support. After the burial, Marshal Rodriguez approached with official documents. "The territorial government has confirmed your ownership of the mining claims," he said. "All previous fraudulent transfers are void. The land is legally yours." Chella accepted the papers with steady hands. Her father's work was finally validated. His sacrifice had meaning. "There's more," the marshal continued. "Kane's operation extracted significant silver over 2 years. Federal law requires compensation to the rightful owner. You're entitled to damages." The amount was substantial, enough to secure Samuel's future, enough to build something lasting in Millbrook. Within a month, Sela had established legitimate mining operations on her property. Mac agreed to oversee the daily work while she focused on other plans. The silver vein ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Her father's surveys had been remarkably accurate. But mining wasn't her only ambition. The schoolhouse had been abandoned for 3 years after the previous teacher left. Sela purchased the building and began renovations. She ordered books from Denver, slates and chalk from Colorado Springs, proper desks to replace the makeshift arrangements she'd used for informal lessons. On a crisp October morning, she opened Millbrook's first integrated school. Samuel was her star pupil, reading at a level far beyond his years. Mary Ellen Henderson had progressed from struggling with simple words to devouring entire books. The blacksmith's sons showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics. But the school served adults too, evening classes for parents who'd never learned to read, basic arithmetic for shop owners, legal literacy for ranchers dealing with land claims and contracts. "Knowledge is power," she told her students, echoing her father's words. "The more you know, the harder it becomes for others to take advantage of you." Mac often visited during school hours, ostensibly to check on Samuel, but really to marvel at Sela's teaching methods. She made learning feel like discovery rather than drudgery. "Your father would be proud," he told her one afternoon. "He prepared me for this. Maybe not exactly this, but something like it." Winter came early that year, but the school remained warm and welcoming. Families who had once crossed the street to avoid the Washington siblings now brought them fresh bread and preserved vegetables. Sela's position as landowner and educator had fundamentally changed how the community viewed her. The transformation wasn't complete or universal. Some residents remained uncomfortable with integrated education. Others resented her sudden prominence. But fear had been replaced by grudging respect. Spring brought new developments. The territorial government appointed Sela as an official land surveyor, recognizing her inherited skills and legal knowledge. She became the first licensed female surveyor in Colorado Territory. Her reputation spread beyond Millbrook. Ranchers and mining companies requested her services throughout the region. Each successful survey strengthened her credibility and financial security. By summer, the school had doubled in size. Parents from neighboring towns sent their children to study under her guidance. She hired 2 assistant teachers and expanded the curriculum to include advanced mathematics and basic law. One evening in late August, as she was closing the schoolhouse, a familiar wagon approached. A tired-looking family with 2 young children. The woman clutched a baby, while the man scanned the town with wary eyes. Chella recognized the expression immediately, the desperate hope mixed with fear of rejection. the careful assessment of which doors might offer shelter. The man climbed down from the wagon and approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, miss. We heard there might be work in these parts. Maybe a place to stay while we get settled." His wife remained on the wagon seat, ready to flee if necessary. The children pressed close to her side. Chella smiled and gestured toward the schoolhouse. "There's always work for people willing to learn. Are you interested in education?" "We can't read much," the man admitted, "but we're willing to try." "Perfect. School starts again next week. There's a boarding house that takes families. Mrs. Pike runs it fair and honest." She gave them detailed directions and a letter of introduction. As their wagon rolled toward town, she felt the deep satisfaction of completion. 3 years ago, she had arrived in Millbrook asking strangers for basic shelter. Now she was the one offering newcomers hope and opportunity. The circle had closed. Her father's legacy lived on through education, justice, and the simple act of opening doors that had once been barred shut. Samuel ran out of the schoolhouse where he'd been organizing books for the fall term. "More students coming?" he asked. "Always," Chella replied, watching the wagon disappear into the gathering dusk. "There's always room for more?"